What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There is a question that terrifies the Kremlin far more than any Western sanction, Ukrainian drone or rebellious governor. What happens the day after Vladimir Putin dies? Not next week, not next month, the very next sunrise after his heartbeat stops. For 25 years, Russia has been shaped, bent, twisted and suffocated around one single man's will. Institutions were dismantled, rivals exiled or executed, elections turned into theater, and the constitution rewritten like a bad homework assignment. Power became so centralized that the entire political structure of the country now sits at one hinge, and that hinge turned out to be a mortal person. So today, let's talk about what happens when that hinge breaks. Not the romantic fairy tale propaganda sells about a noble transition, not the delusion optimism of Russia will magically become a democracy the next day, but a raw, unfiltered look at how the country actually transforms when the dictator disappears. We will talk about the first day, the first week, the first month and then the first year, because the truth is simple. The real collapse never happens at the moment of death. It happens when everyone realizes that they are suddenly free to choose chaos. Let's start from the moment the news leaks, because it will leak. You cannot contain this information. The Kremlin can hide attacks, strokes, surgeries, body doubles and fake TV appearances, but the death of an emperor is too massive to bury under a Telegram blackout. Within hours, the presidential administration will go into emergency lockdown. Phones confiscated, staff detained inside their offices, generals summoned, governors kept in the dark, and a tiny inner circle, Patrushev, Bornikov, Kirienko, perhaps a trembling Mishustin, will gather to decide only one single thing. Guys, what do we tell people? Well, the very first announcement will obviously not be the truth. It will be a vague message about temporary health instability, followed by frantic attempts to edit and release the last pre-recorded videos of Putin greeting imaginary regional officials. But the gossip channels will explode. Soldiers on the front lines will start messaging home. Diplomats will call their families. Markets will panic. The ruble will fall like a rock from the Siberian cliff. Russian elites, for the very first time in decades, will feel something they forgot ever existed. Fear of uncertainty. And while Moscow hides the truth, the security services will do the completely opposite behind the scenes. The FSB will seal government buildings. Rosgvardia will deploy armored vehicles around strategic points. Chechen units will prepare to move, waiting for Kadyrov's orders, if he is still alive at that time. Everyone will be bracing for the moment the announcement becomes official. Because the same day Putin dies is the same day everyone in Russia with the tiniest fragment of ambition will see an empty throne. Without a doubt, the first 24 hours will be the most intense. The death of Putin might become one of the most important events in the modern history of the world, definitely in the history of Russia. The country will go to sleep and wake up to a totally different everything. What might happen then? Let's talk about it in our next chapter. By the next morning, the lie will most likely collapse. Too many leaks, too many rumors, too much panic. So the Kremlin finally confirms it. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin has passed away. And this single sentence divides the entire country immediately into two groups. Those who are paralyzed by grief and those who are paralyzed by opportunity. Inside Moscow's corridors of power, the knives come out instantly. There is no successor, no heir, no designated guardian of the empire. Putin deliberately prevented one, because he thought that choosing a successor meant literally choosing his own executioner. That's why there's none. So now the ruling elite becomes a gladiator pit. Siloviki factions begin forming alliances in real time. Generals offer loyalty in exchange for protection. Oligarchs try to secure their assets abroad. Bureaucrats pledge obedience to whoever looks like they can potentially win. And then there is Kadyrov. The moment Putin is gone, Kadyrov understands that his entire power, his money, his autonomy, his private army was built on personal loyalty to the dictator, not to Russia as a state. With Putin dead, his position becomes fragile. So, what does he do? He mobilizes, he prepares, he demands guarantees from Moscow. And for the first time in 20 years, Chechnya considers what independence might look like again. Not publicly, but internally, within the walls of Grozny, the capital. But while elites fight, ordinary Russians look around and ask themselves another question. Is this the moment the war ends, maybe, hopefully? Well, the truth is, nobody knows. The machine that started the war is still kind of running. Yes, like the men who supported the war are still powerful. Because, yeah, Putin may have died, but his decisions did not. Because so far, one of the most popular assumptions is that Russian-Ukrainian war will continue for as long as Putin is alive, in one form or another. So many things will change, and each new day will make Russia unrecognizable. The first week is what will probably shape the future of a new Russia for the next several years or even decades. Let's talk about the events to happen during the next 7 days after Putin's demise in our next chapter. Within the first week, the power struggle becomes impossible to hide. Mishustin might be so-called acting president on paper, but in reality he is just a placeholder with a nice suit. The real fight is between the security clans, the FSB, the military, the National Guard. Each one of them wants control of the nuclear briefcase, the army and the media. Each one believes that they and only they can protect Russia during this transition. And as Moscow tears itself apart quietly, the regions start realizing that now is their best chance to do something. Kaliningrad, for example, isolated, encircled by NATO, economically unstable, understands that without Putin its strategic importance becomes both a blessing and a curse. Some local elites begin whispering the unthinkable, autonomy, why not? Who's gonna stop them? Perhaps European integration eventually, perhaps even breaking ties with Moscow if chaos deepens. Nobody says it out loud, of course, but the conversations begin immediately. Chechnya, then, sensing Moscow's weakness, becomes bolder. For 20 years, Kadyrov played the loyal servant, but loyalty dies with the master. His private army is larger and more loyal than nearly all regional forces combined. And if Moscow tries to limit his influence or cut his funding under a new ruler, he will resist, believe it. 100%. And he'll do it violently if needed. The Kremlin knows it. They tread carefully, because a Chechen power struggle is the last thing they need while Russia is still burying the emperor. Meanwhile, the regions devastated by war, such as Buryatia, Tuva, Bashkortostan, Dagestan, all they begin demanding answers, because they sacrificed the highest percentage of their young men. They buried thousands. They lost fathers, sons, workers, entire generations. And now, well, they would now want compensation. They would want representation. They want something back for the blood they spilled. They want answers, simple as that. These demands don't reach federal TV, but they echo through regional parliaments and local protests. And then what about the West then? Nobody rushes to embrace Russia. Too much distraction, too much war, too much propaganda. Its enemies, such as Europe, the US, Japan, they all watch and wait. A nation that unleashed the largest war in Europe since 1945 does not get forgiven just because the man behind died. What about friends then? China, India, North Korea? Well, realize that Russia is at its absolute weakest point. That's what they're going to do immediately. So, well, it's time to rewrite the deals, cancel agreements, and potentially even redraw the borders. Why not? Does anyone else still think that Chinese-Indian-Russian friendship is genuine? I mean, come on. They will be the first ones to gut Russia when something bad happens. The first week after Putin's demise will most likely be the most eventful, but truly monumental changes will start happening during the first month. Let's talk about it now in our next chapter. A month later, the Kremlin finally chooses someone most likely, or rather somebody emerges victorious. Maybe it's a security chief like Patrushev's son, maybe a compromised technocrat, maybe somebody the elite believes they can control. But whoever it is, the message becomes painfully clear. This is not a reformer, this is a stabilizer. Somebody choosing not to change the system, but to keep it at least alive. Someone to take the blame of all the rash decisions and then retire in complete obscurity. But stability is an illusion. Beneath the surface, blaming games begin. The new leader must deal with a collapsing economy, sanctions that will not just simply disappear, a war that nobody knows neither how to win nor how to end, and then regions that now smell the weakness of the center. Governors start requesting more autonomy, local parliaments grow more vocal, the idea of federal restructuring once taboo suddenly returns to political debate. Kaliningrad then tests how far it can push, Chechnya pushes harder, and in eastern Siberia, where entire communities lost a third of their working-age men, resentment grows like wildfire. These regions were ignored under Putin. Now they demand resources, investment and protection. But the new leader does not have enough money to satisfy them all. And once people realize the Kremlin cannot simply fulfill its promises, the danger becomes real. Separation sentiment begins whispering from corners the FSB can no longer even easily silence. On the international stage, Russia finds itself isolated. Western nations refuse to lift major sanctions without concrete reforms, such as at least free elections, troop withdrawal, accountability for war crimes. That's the least they can ask for. None of this is acceptable, of course, to the new elite, but, who know that any real reform leads to their downfall. So they just stall, they delay, they pretend to negotiate. And Russia remains an outcast, at least for now. At the same time, war fatigue becomes overwhelming. Mothers demand their sons back, soldiers ask why they are even still fighting, for what? Regional officials beg for mobilization to stop, and the new leader, terrified of looking weak, just refuses. But every refusal cracks the system a little bit more. A person who was once supposed to be different from Putin ends up being forced to continue his style of politics. Because the regime that Vladimir Vladimirovich built became more than just one person, even if this one person is Putin himself. That is how most likely the first month will end. But the initial transformation of the entire Russia will not be completed within at least 1 year. Will country become something entirely different, or will things remain the same? Will the new government be able to scrape the stench of the dictator from the Kremlin walls and start things from scratch? Start things from year 2000? Once again, because that's when Russia stopped developing. Let's try to answer this question in our final chapter. A year after Putin's death, and the transformation is undeniable. Russia is no longer the same country. Not stronger, not freer, but fractured. The state still exists, but its authority is uneven. Some regions obey, some resist, some negotiate autonomy behind closed doors. Chechnya acts like a quasi-independent kingdom, Kaliningrad's business elites push harder for European ties, and the Far East demands economic sovereignty after decades of neglect. The new ruler sits in the Kremlin, but he governs a far weaker Russia, economically broken, politically unstable, socially divided, and internationally isolated still. And the question becomes, is the country better without Putin? Well, it depends on what you even mean by better. Without Putin, the fear begins to fade. Journalists test new boundaries, activists reappear, regional leaders speak more boldly, but the empire he built continues to hone the new Russia. His wars, his brutality, his centralization of power, his destruction of institutions, his belief that Russia must be ruled not by laws, but by loyalty and fear. The world does not embrace Russia overnight either. How could it? A nation that helped commit atrocities must face at least some consequences. And those consequences do not just vanish with a funeral. So 1 year later, Russia stands at a crossroads. It can reform, painfully, slowly, realistically, or it can collapse under the weight of unresolved contradictions. Dictators leave behind ruins, not foundations, and Putin's Russia has been left inside an entire crater. The work to at least bring the country to ground level will be monumental, and only then, many years later, we can hypothesize about it trying to integrate back with the leading nations. Guys, let us know down below if you think these scenarios make sense to you or not, or how else you think Russia evolves after Putin's passing. It will be very interesting, for me at least personally, to read all your theories from people all around the world. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to join our private Telegram group, you can become our Patreon or YouTube channel member. You will receive invitation link immediately. The links to join are down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow. See you on Tuesday. We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in